Disappointment. Sadness or displeasure caused by the non-fulfillment of one's hopes or expectations. That's the word that comes to mind when I think of Wo Long Fallen Dynasty. I was very excited for this game, not only because I love Asian-based setting games and like the Asian culture, but because the gameplay for this game looked phenomenal before its release. And after playing the game, I can say I'm not really impressed, so let me just get into my thoughts. Now, since the focus of these types of games is mainly the gameplay and boss fights, I think it's only right that I start here. And for the most part, I do really enjoy the gameplay. I think it's the best aspect of the game, but I still don't think it's that great. It's got a really good system on blocking and parrying attacks, and it's really satisfying. And it's got a solid amount of enemy variety. You got zombie dudes and your regular dudes. These dudes can have like 4 to 5 different types of weapons. You've got projectile enemies such as like these wizard crackheads that throw fire at you and shit. And I'm convinced that these enemies were only created to piss people off. They got these brute things that can have like this hammer or 2 sword things. You got Ratatouille if you miss his calling, and there's a big Ratatouille and a little Ratatouille. They're also a mix of hedgehogs, I think. I don't know, my knowledge of hedgehogs pretty much only comes from the blue one, but they can set themselves on fire and roll at you like Sonic if he was red and suicidal. You got Tony the Tiger if he was telling you shit ain't great all the time, and also had a man inside of him, paws. You got these bootleg mermaids with a pine cone for a tail, or at least it looks like a pine cone. You got this pterodactyl chicken bird thing, and pretty much fighting it goes like this. Oh, wait till you get back down here. Come on. Where the fuck you go? Wait till you get back down here. I'm gonna beat you. Wait till you get back down here. I'm gonna beat you. Yeah, that's pretty much all they do. That's like the only move they know. As you can see, it's a very fun time. Great enemy design there, Team Ninja. Real good job. There's also this giant, well, let's just say challenged alligator crocodile. Got 2 legs, a big head, and a tail. Yeah, there's spiders. You got these big albino monkeys. Only these albino monkeys don't throw poop at you. And they also can't function without their heads. You got these fire guy things that kind of look like coal obsidian. You got these ninja swordsman guys who are probably the most annoying enemy type in the game. No, that still goes to the chicken bird pterodactyls. But the ninja swordsmen are definitely, they're definitely second. You got Beatbot from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and you've also got Panda. This isn't an enemy type, but they've got it listed here for some reason. That pretty much wraps up all the enemies in this game. There's a couple more, but who cares? And now we can have all these enemy types, but you need a great combat system to fight them. And this game has that, for the most part. I have one major problem with it that doesn't make it fully great, but I'll talk about that last. But there's a lot of different weapons to choose from. Personally, I only care for the swords because the other weapons are either boring as fuck or too slow. And that's just not my style of play. But if that's you, that's you. You got these elemental powers, and if I'm being honest, these things are pretty useless. The only ones I found myself using consistently was the ones that make your sword go into like an element, like a lightning sword or a fire sword. But for the most part, I barely ever use them because they don't really help you that much, and there's no necessity to use them. Like for instance, this fire boss fight, I would think, oh, maybe if I use water, it would make the enemy weaker, right? Nope, it barely did any more damage than a regular sword attack would have. So the elemental stuff is it's pretty useless. I wouldn't really have a problem with the elemental stuff like being useless if it actually allowed for like a bit of fun creativity. Like take Spider-Man PS4 for example. The gadgets in Spider-Man PS4 aren't a necessity to use, but they can help you out in the combat, and you can get really creative with them. But the elemental stuff in this game, you can't really get creative with it. But hey, the lightning sword was cool. For attacking, it's pretty basic. You can use ranged weapons, but again, these feel pretty pointless and boring. They barely do any damage for most of the game, and when you use them, it really messes up the combat flow because it makes you like stand in place and you can't really move with them, so I barely ever use them. And for melee weapons, you got a couple different ways you can attack. Your main attack, which you'll probably use most of the time, is just spamming the square button, and you can press triangle for a spirit attack, which is basically a heavy attack, and you got these martial arts abilities, which are also basically heavy attacks. And for the block and parry system, it's also good. I don't really have anything to complain about except for like that when you're blocking, you can also parry mid-block without dropping your guard, so it kind of makes the game a bit more easy. While in a game like Sekiro, Ghost of Tsushima, or Jedi Fallen Order, it makes you drop your guard so you have to perfectly time your parry, and that's why in those games it's a much more fun risk like reward aspect of the combat system. But that's the only thing I really have to complain about for Wo Long's parry and block mechanic. They also have AIs, which I didn't figure out you could get rid of until I was like 75% through the game, so there's that.
You peanut head motherfucker!
Sometimes having them with me was pretty fun because we would just start jumping people.
Fight back, nigga! Fight back! Fight back!
But for the most part, they were pretty damn annoying and they always get in your way. Now, sometimes they had some funny dialogue that made me laugh, not because it was actually funny, but it was just because it was so fucking stupid.
Such ferocity. They must have seasoned warriors among their ranks.
It's a fucking rat.
So, this battleground is to become my grave.
If if you don't pick your overdramatic ass up. But now we get to my biggest problem with this game's combat system, the thing that holds it back from being truly great, and that's the crowd control segments, and my god do these things fucking suck. This game's combat system, when you're in like a nice one-on-one scenario with an enemy, will go from fun and enjoyable to painfully irritating in like a millisecond. When you're fighting like 3+ enemies, it's egregiously bad, especially with some of the harder, less fodder enemy types. Think of games like Spider-Man, God of War, Batman Arkham, Ghost of Tsushima, Jedi Fallen Order. All of these games have fantastic combat systems, and when you're fighting a group of enemies, it's actually fun. They have great cameras, audio or visual cues that will tell you when an off-screen enemy is trying to hit you, and you also don't have to lock onto an enemy for your attacks to feel precise in those games. While in Wo Long Fallen Dynasty, it's the opposite. There's no visual cues that make group fights actually fun and more doable. Like when you can react to like visual cues or audio cues to actually do something about an incoming attack, it makes the combat so much more fun, and it keeps the flow going and doesn't make you take unnecessary damage for something that's out of your control or eyesight. And unless you're locked onto an enemy, your attacks will feel imprecise at times, and it'll make you swing your sword in some random direction sometimes that you didn't even mean to swing your sword in. When you lock onto someone, which is basically your only option if you want a stable camera that actually helps you out in combat, but when you lock onto an enemy, that leaves you open for other enemies. And remember, you might have no clue where the other enemies are, because if they're not in your camera view, you won't know where they are, which leaves you open to their attacks, and you also don't know where their attacks are coming from, and you also don't get any visual or audio cues that tell you someone's about to attack you from somewhere you can't even see. And you also have to be facing an enemy if you actually want to block their attacks, or else you're getting hit. Like if you're not directly facing an enemy, then you cannot block their attack. And when you start to attack one enemy, another enemy will come at you right away, which isn't a problem, except that in this game, they never let up. You barely have a minute to breathe. It just gets very overcrowded and annoying, and it really just fucks up the combat flow. Look at how in Jedi Fallen Order, for example, when I'm trying to attack an enemy, my character will be drawn to the nearest enemy I'm looking at. And this is without needing to use the lock-on option, and all my attacks still feel precise. While in Wo Long Fallen Dynasty, unless I'm locked onto an enemy, my attacks will just go anywhere, which disrupts the combat flow. And also, when I'm focused on one enemy in Jedi Fallen Order, another enemy will sometimes come and try to hit me, which isn't a bad thing. But when I press the block or parry button in Jedi Fallen Order, my guard is drawn automatically to the person that's trying to hit me at that moment. So I don't have to directly look at someone who's attacking me from a different direction in order to block their attack. While in Wo Long, that's what you have to do. Imagine if you were playing like Arkham Combat and you had to turn around and look at an enemy that you're trying to counter, or else your counter button wouldn't work on the person that's trying to hit you from behind. Can you imagine how much that would suck? Well, yeah, that's exactly how it is in Wo Long Fallen Dynasty. Now let's look at God of War. When an enemy is about to attack me or trying to hit me, and mind you, other games do this, but I get like an arrow or some type of visual cue or audio cue that lets me know someone that's out of my view is trying to hit me. This is good so I'm not unfairly hit by something that's out of my control. While in Wo Long, if someone's not in your view, it's too bad, so sad, because you're getting hit and you won't even know it, or you won't even have any opportunity to do anything about it. I'd also like to add in that switching the lock-on from enemy to enemy is kind of a pain in the ass when fighting a group of enemies. Sometimes it can just switch onto a target on its own without you even actually meaning to do that, or the opposite will happen when I'm trying to lock onto another enemy but it won't let me. It's things like this that just make fighting groups of enemies in this game fucking unbearable, and it's just really irritating. It makes it so that it's not a test of skill in certain aspects, because some things are straight up out of your control, straight up messy and just unfun, which is terrible combat design for these group fights. And this is the reason why I really just cannot call this combat system great. If they would have had all these things in this combat system, then it would have been phenomenal, but unfortunately it just doesn't, which now segues me into the boss fight. And my god, I have to talk about one of the worst boss fights I have ever played in a fucking video game. Now keep in mind everything I just said about how bad the group combat is. Now think of 10 different enemies fighting you all at the same time, while one of them is the main boss in disguise that does more damage. And not only do all 10 of these motherfuckers have movesets that can come really fast and are variated amongst all the chaos and other stuff that's going on around you, but they also shoot heat-seeking fucking lightning balls that you barely even see coming half the time. And remember, you can't fucking block them unless you're looking dead at them, and you also don't know when they're coming because you get no type of warning from something that's out of your eyesight or camera view. This boss fight fucking sucks. Not only just because of the terrible crowd control in the combat system, but when you finally figure out that you need to keep one of his little minions alive and then just one-on-one the main boss, you see how bad it truly is. And it becomes easy as fuck, because I then realized, oh, his moveset's not even that hard to pick up on at all. It was just because there was 10 different enemies and lightning attacks going on around me that made it seem that way. And once I realized that, he got his ass beat. And was I satisfied after beating this boss? No. Because it wasn't fun in the slightest, and my monitor is probably lucky it doesn't have a hole in it right now. Because I kept dying to bullshit that was just unfair, unforgiving, and straight up out of my control. I give this boss fight a 3 out of 10. Fuck this shit. And before I talk about the other boss fights, I will lay out my criteria for what makes a good boss fight or a great boss fight in my eyes. Number 1, the most important thing for me is, does the character have any emotional weight or impact behind them from like a character perspective? Example, Doc Ock boss fight from Spider-Man PS4. Number 2, and this is the second most important thing to me, is it just straight up fun and or challenging? Does the boss have a good variety of moves that keep you on your toes, making the fight more mechanically engaging and things less predictable? For the most recent example I can think of this is a lot of the boss fights from God of War Ragnarok, especially Gina or Na. Number 3, is it visually pleasing, cinematic, or just feel awesome while playing it? And number 4, is it creative and unique from other boss fights? Example, Mr. Freeze boss fight from Arkham City. And if the boss fight doesn't have at least 2 to 3 of these things, depending on like certain context behind situations and said boss fight, then it's a bad and or decent boss fight in my opinion. Like I said, depending on context of certain situations. And let me just get this out of the way now. I don't care for a single character in this game or its story. There is not a single likable character or interesting one, so the boss fights will never get points for that. The first boss fight is Zhang Liang. This boss fight was actually pretty fun. It wasn't the most challenging, as it only took me 3 tries to beat him, but I enjoyed it. He had a fun moveset, and it was the first boss of the game. It was a nice little introduction. I give this boss fight a 7 out of 10. This pig thing, this boss fight sucked. It wasn't really hard. The arena was pretty bland, and this boss fight isn't even a boss fight because it kind of just turns into a regular enemy type throughout the rest of the game, so there's that. I give this like a 3 out of 10. Zhang Bao, this firebender motherfucker, I like this one. It actually had a cool arena, and it actually took me like 5 times to beat them before I actually realized that if I just used my AI companions that I didn't know how to get rid of at this point in the game, we could just jump this dude. But I did enjoy this one, so I give it a 7.5 out of 10. Zhang Xiao, this boss fight took me legitimately 3 minutes to beat on my first try. I'm not kidding about that. And it wasn't enjoyable in the slightest. This shit was so boring. 2 out of 10. The 5th boss fight in the game is this hairy nutsack cow. This is actually a really good boss fight. I really like this one. And it's home to one of the only world designs in this game I actually enjoyed exploring, but I'll touch on that later. But this one took me like 30 tries to beat my first time, and it was pretty fun. And I like the boss arena. I give it an 8 out of 10. But I'd also like to mention this boss is reused later in the game and just turned into a normal enemy type towards the last level. But at least it was a good fight. The 6th boss fight is like this bootleg Medusa. This is another one that was pretty damn easy and boring. This whole level was pretty damn boring, and this was also home to the other boss fight I was complaining about in the beginning with the crowd control bullshit. Overall, I give this snake fake Medusa thing like a 3 out of 10. 7th boss fight is Lu Bu. This is another boss fight I really like. Probably one of the hardest boss fights in the game. A few problems I have with the design of this boss fight. Well, 1, the arena is just, it's bland and boring. And 2, this dude has a lot of fucking health for like no reason. And once you learn his moveset, it's pretty much just a test of endurance because you just keep blocking the same fucking moves over and over and over again. And the boss fight kind of just drags out longer than it should have. It's less of a test of skill and just more how long can you last in this fight. I don't know. I would have just enjoyed it more if the boss had less health and it was, you know, just didn't get dragged out for longer than it should have. But I give this an 8 out of 10. The 8th boss fight, I call this one the Animal Orgy. When this boss fight started, I was hyped. The arena was cool. We were about to fight this giant animal orgy. I was thinking I was gonna be here for a while, but nope, this boss fight sucked. It wasn't challenging at all. The moveset was legitimately so easy. I beat this thing on my first try. There's even these sections like throughout the boss fight where you stagger it. The game completely stops the whole momentum of the fight and makes you climb these red tree things with its terrible platforming mechanics just to stab a red thing on his head. The only real points I can give this boss fight was the arena and the spectacle, but to sum it up, the boss fight was basically this. Yes, this is as boring as it looks. And this boss fight is the same problem I have with a lot of the boss fights in the game. What the fuck is up with the music? Like, there's barely any ever cool music playing during these boss fights. It got to the point where I would just start listening to fucking Lady Gaga while I was playing. I mean, shit, I'm not complaining, you know what I mean, because it's Gaga, you know what I'm saying? Nah, man, I mean, like, the fucking music in this game is pretty shit. But I give this boss fight, like, a 3 out of 10. And since I realized this video is getting way longer than I wanted it to be, I'm just gonna speed this up. Number 9, Sun Jian. I love tigers, so I'm probably giving this boss a higher score than it deserves, but 8 out of 10. Dong Xiao. Great variety of moves, was pretty challenging, 8 out of 10. Number 11, Xiao Dun. This boss fight wasn't that fun, it was pretty easy, 5 out of 10. Number 12 is Zhang Lao. It was pretty hard, it was very fun, and it was cool, 8 out of 10. Number 13, Lu Bu Part 2. Damn, bars. harsh. This was a bit better than the first fight. I still have the same problem with this fight than I do with the previous fight. It still kind of drags out longer than it should have, and I hate that he runs away. I can't stand when bosses do that and you have to like chase them. That shit's just so stupid in my opinion. But I give this like an 8.5 out of 10. I think it was a little bit of a step up from the first fight. Number 14 is a dual boss fight. It's Yang Liang and Wen Xiao. I was expecting this to be hard, but it wasn't, and it was also very boring. I give it like a 3 out of 10. Number 15 is Liu Bi. I'm probably butchering the shit out of these names. This boss was very hard and it was very fun. I give it a 9 out of 10. Number 16 is Yun Xiao. This boss fight was pretty damn boring and it wasn't that hard. I give it a 4 out of 10. Number 17 is Yu Ji and the Big Dragon. This was actually extremely fun for the first phase of the boss fight. The second phase was okay. It was a cool fight. It had cool visuals, a cool arena, and fighting a dragon will never not be cool, but it was like very easy and it just wasn't that fun towards the second phase. But overall, between the two phases, I give it like an 8 out of 10. Number 18, the final boss of this game. This was actually the best one in the game, which I liked and would honestly expect. It's the final boss. I only wish the arena for this boss fight was a little cooler. Like the fight before with the dragon absolutely blows this arena out of the water. But besides the arena just being a boring ass grass field, this boss fight was very fun. It had the funnest moveset to fight against, and it was very challenging. Which is funny, I say this because I almost beat him my first try, but then after this, it took me like 8 more tries to beat him. I give this boss a 9.5 out of 10. There's a couple side bosses in the game that I didn't mention because they were either not that good or I didn't play them. But my average rating for the boss fights would be a 6.1 out of 10. It had some good ones, it had some great ones, it had some shit ones, and that's just my general consensus. Now, if you know anything about me, you know I love stories in video games. But Jesus Christ, this game's story is like, it's disrespectfully bad. There is not a single interesting thing going on here. There's not a single interesting character that's presented. There isn't even a single likable character in this game. And I can't believe I did this, but legitimately halfway through the game, I don't even remember the last time I did this. I started skipping the fucking cutscenes. You may not think that's a big deal, but for me, I can't even remember the last time I did that. And that just goes to show how terrible this shit is. Like, I refuse to believe an actual professional got paid to write this shit. And the voice acting is so goddamn laughable. Like, listen to this shit.
Well, Tiger Sunshine, care to join me now? Tempt me all you may. I will not join forces with evil.
And the last thing I'm going to talk about is the game design of the other aspects of the game. It's not great. All the levels feel exactly the same. You go through each level fighting the same enemies, which isn't inherently a problem because it's got good enemy variety and fun combat. But sometimes the enemy variety goes very underused and you wind up only fighting like 6 variated enemies per level. But also it gets so boring because again, the story driving me through these levels is so goddamn shitty and unengaging, and you don't do anything different from level to level. All you do every level is go through a bunch of enemies to get your fortitude high enough for the boss fight, then fight the boss. And most of the time I would go into a boss just under-leveled because the boss fight might have been too easy. There was a couple bosses that made me go back and raise my fortitude, but that is literally every single level in this game. Nothing is different from level to level. If you've played level 1 in this game, you've played every other level in this game. And again, I don't care about a single boss fight in this game from a narrative perspective, so I just get bored going through every level just to fight the boss and move on to the next one. I wasn't trying to savor my experience with the game, I was just trying to run through it as quickly as possible. And if the boss fight sucked by the end of the boring ass level, then it really degraded my experience, especially considering every level will take you around 20 to 40 minutes to get through, and the exploration throughout these levels feels meaningless and boring. The only real reason you have to explore is to raise your fortitude, but again, you have to do that every single level and it doesn't change. It's just so damn boring. Other than that, most of the time you'll just find a duplicate armor set or an item you'll probably never use. I already mentioned the fact that they reuse some of the boss fights throughout each level. I don't think I need to go over that again. But back on the topic of world design, some of them are great, some of them are good, and 50% of them are just bland and boring. And I'm also not a big fan of the art style in this game. It looks cool sometimes, but most of the time I really just don't like it. And sometimes enemies will like blend into environments and not really stick out, which can be very irritating. And also it can be hard to like figure out the exact point where you're at throughout a level because there's no real diversity throughout a lot of the level in terms of areas and environment designs. And again, just 50% of these worlds are just bland and boring and nothing really sticks out to the eye. So exploring and backtracking can be kind of confusing and tedious at times. I don't really care for the gear system in this game either. I don't care to look through any of the bonuses for each duplicate armor set and see which helmet makes my nutsack larger or which pair of pants makes me grow more chest hair. It's like, I don't care about any of this. If that's your thing, good for you. Personally, I couldn't care less. Like a game like God of War makes their gear system so much easier to understand, but this game, it's just, there's so many different variables and different like stat boosts and shit that just go into it, and I just don't care to look through all of it. I literally stuck with the same set of armor and sword for pretty much my whole game. Oh, and also the customization in this game, it's ass. But to wrap up my thoughts, thoughts and give my score for the game, the level designs would be like a 6 out of 10. The world designs are hit or miss. I give them like a 6.5 out of 10. The story is shit, 2 out of 10. The boss fights, I have it an average score of 6.2 out of 10. And the combat is really good and it's fun. I give it an 8 out of 10 despite my gripes that I've discussed earlier. And factoring my enjoyment into this game, I'd say on the scale of 1 to 10, it was probably like a 6 out of 10. So with all that said and everything factored in, my rating for this game is a 6 out of 10. And yeah, let me know what you guys think of the game. Let me know if you guys disagree with some of my criticisms. And if you do, let me know why you disagree. And yeah.